The King of the Iron Territories had been in my kitchen 4 times since breakfast, and the bells had not yet rung noon. The first time he had come for bread. The second time he had also come for bread, though he took none. The third time he stood by the hearth with the expression of a man who has walked into a room and forgotten why, which is a common enough affliction, except that he was the strongest wolf alive and was not supposed to forget anything, least of all in front of the woman scaling fish. This was the 4th time. He was pretending to inspect the spice shelf. He had been pretending to inspect the spice shelf for some while. We did not, as a rule, keep anything on that shelf that warranted a quarter hour of a king's attention. We kept salt. I am Tilda. I have run the palace kitchen since I was 23, which is young for the post, and was held against me for the first 2 years, until everyone got too used to eating to keep complaining. I know flame and salt and the temper of dough and the precise moment a sauce turns. I know how to make a hard man's whole day better with a bowl and never be thanked for it, which is the actual trade, under the cooking. What I did not know, that autumn, was why the King of the Iron Territories kept turning up in my kitchen like a tide nobody had charted. He took the heel of the loaf on his way out. The burnt end. The piece I set aside for the dogs and the beggars at the postern. The piece no one with a choice ever chooses. He took it the way a man pockets a thing he does not want seen. And he left without a word, and his wolf, I would swear to this in any court, looked back at me from the door, though the man did not. By the end of that week, he had a stool. I had not given it to him. No one had. There was a 3-legged stool by the hearth that I used to reach the high hooks, and one afternoon I turned around, and the most powerful man in the territories was folded onto it like a heron onto a fence post, knees somewhere near his ears, watching me render fat with the grave attention other men give to war. The stool was too small for him by half. He returned to it the next day, and the next. The scullery girls stopped shrieking when he came in and started simply working around him, the way you work around a large dog that has decided your hearth is its hearth and cannot be reasoned out of it. His beater found him there on the 5th day. Osric was a tidy, worried man who carried the king's schedule in his head and visibly suffered every time the king deviated from it, which was now, by my count, thrice daily. He stood in my doorway and looked at his king sitting on a stool built for a child of 9, and I watched him decide not to mention it.
My lord, the border envoys.
They can wait. They have waited since the morning, my lord. You said the morning. Then a little longer will not undo them. The king did not look up from the fat. Tilda, what is that you are putting in?
Rosemary, my lord.
He said it as though I had told him something that explained a great deal. When he had gone, taking, on his way, the burnt heel of the new loaf, Osric lingered. He had the look of a man who needs to say a thing aloud to find out if it is mad. He has not eaten a meal anywhere but this room in 11 days, he said. He says it is the stress of the season, the treaties, the envoys. He paused. I have served him 9 years. He has never once cared what was in the food. He asked you what was in the food. It was rosemary, I said. Yes, said Osric, with the despair of a man who suspects rosemary is not the point, and went to placate the envoys. I will tell you what I thought it was, because it is important that you know I am not always right, and that I knew the truth last of anyone, which is its own small comedy. I thought he was lonely. It is not a stupid thing to think about a king. They are surrounded at all hours, and known by no one. I thought the kitchen was the one room in his fortress where nobody wanted anything from him, where the fire did not care that he was an alpha, and the bread rose or did not rise, regardless of his rank, and that he had wandered into the only warmth in the place, that asked nothing of him, and stayed because no one had ever let him before. I thought I was being kind, leaving him his stool. I was wrong, but I was wrong tenderly, and I have decided that counts for something. He came at night, once. That was new. The kitchen at night is a different country. The great fires bank down to red, the copper goes dark, and the room that roars all day holds its breath. I was there because I do not sleep well, and the dough does not mind the hour. I had flour to the elbow when I heard the door, and I did not need to turn to know the particular quality of quiet that had walked in with him. He did not go to the stool. He stood at the long table across from me, on the other side of the dough, and for a while he watched my hands work and said nothing, and I let him, because some silences are a kind of conversation, and I have learned not to interrupt them. "They tell me," he said at last, "that I am behaving strangely." Do they? Osric has begun leaving books on my table, books about wolves. He turned a fallen scrap of dough over with one finger, like a man examining evidence against himself. He thinks I have not noticed the books. I kept folding the dough. And what do the books say? Nothing I will repeat in a kitchen at midnight to a woman holding that much flour. Something moved at the corner of his mouth, that on a lesser man I would have called the beginning of a smile, and that on him looked like the first crack in a long winter. They say a great many certain things about a matter no one has ever been certain of. I do not trust certainty. It is usually selling something. I should have left it there. I am not, it turns out, a woman who leaves things there. My grandmother believed in the bond, I said. The true one. The one the wolf knows before the man. I shaped the loaf without looking up, because it is easier to say bold things to bread than to a king. She said it does not care for rank. She said it has ruined more careful arrangements than war. She also believed you could cure a fever with a potato tied to your foot, so I have always taken her broadly. He went very still across the table, stiller than a man should be able to. The banked fire ticked. "And do you believe it?" he said. "The bond?" "I believe I have a loaf to put in before the fire dies, and that you are between me and the oven." He moved. Of course he moved. The strongest wolf alive stepped out of my way in his own kitchen, and I slid the loaf onto the stone, and when I straightened, he was looking at me the way you look at a door you did not know was in a wall you have walked past your whole life. "Good night, Tilda," he said. He took the heel on his way out. There was no heel to take. It was a fresh loaf, uncut. He took it anyway, tore it from the warm end with his hand, and carried it into the dark, like a thief. And I stood in my own kitchen with flour to the elbow, and the unwelcome beginning of a suspicion that my grandmother had been right about more than potatoes. Lady Vesna arrived with the first snow, and a retinue, and a contract. I learned the shape of it the way the kitchen learns everything, which is from the bottom up and before the people it concerns. A marriage was being arranged. A southern alliance, iron and grain, sealed the old way. Lady Vesna was the price and the prize of it. A woman built the way a blade is built, all line and edge and no waste. And she had come to be Luna of the Iron Territories, and she did not intend to wait long for the title. She came down to my kitchen on her second day. They always do, the ones who mean to run a household. You can tell everything about how a great lady will rule by how she speaks to the cook. And Lady Vesna told me everything in under a minute. The betrothal feast will be the largest this hall has seen. She drew one gloved finger along my clean table and inspected it for a dust that was not there. I will be bringing my own kitchen, my own people. The household is to be reorganized for the new era. She looked at me then, fully, for the first time, and I understood that she had already heard about the king and the stool and the rosemary, that she had heard about it before she heard anything else, and had come to the heart of the trouble to look at it. There will not, I think, be a place for the old arrangements, or the old staff. You understand. I understood. I have been understood at by experts my whole life. It rolls off. As my lady wishes, I said, because there are fights you do not win standing in an apron, and I am not a fool. I did not expect to win that one. I did not expect the king to win it for me, in the worst possible way, 2 days later, in front of his entire court. It happened at the high table, at the announcement of the household reforms, with the court assembled. Vesna read out the changes in her clear, cold voice, the new steward, the new kitchens, the new order, and she came to the line about the old staff being released with thanks, and she said it looking not at the king, but at me, where I stood by the service door, because the cook always stands by the service door. And the king, who had signed off on all of it, who had let the contract be drawn and the lady be brought and the reforms be written, opened his mouth to do the thing every soul in that hall expected, which was nothing. No, he said. The hall did the thing a hall does when the floor moves under it. Vesna's voice did not waver, which I will grant her. My lord? The kitchens stay. He said it as though it were obvious, as though it were a fact about the weather. And then I watched the most powerful man alive arrive, in real time, at the discovery that he had no idea why he had said it, and was now required to explain himself to 200 people. His jaw worked. The food is. He stopped. He was a man feeling along a dark wall for a door he was certain existed. I will not have the kitchens disturbed in a season of treaties. Continuity. The envoys are accustomed to the table. It would be... And here he reached visibly for the largest word within reach and seized it like a drowning man. Destabilizing. Destabilizing, Vesna repeated. Yes, said the king of the Iron Territories, with the grim conviction of a man who has chosen his hill and means to die on it, though he does not know its name. I want it recorded that I did not laugh. It cost me something not to. Across the hall I caught Osric's eye, and Osric had the look of a man watching his king fall down a well, very slowly, and the two of us shared, in silence, the most dangerous joke in the kingdom. The kitchens stayed. I kept my post by a king's word and a king's lie, and the lie was so thin you could have read a treaty through it, and every noble in that hall went home that night with the same thought arranging itself behind their careful faces. The king eats nowhere but the cook's half. And now the king will not let the cook be moved, and the king cannot say why. The wolf could have said why. The wolf had been saying it for a month, 3 times a day, in the only language it had. No one had thought to ask the wolf. If you have stayed in the kitchen with me this long, stay a little longer, because this is the point where I stopped being able to pretend I did not know. And what I did about it is the part I am least proud of, and most glad of. If her side of these stories is the side you came for, follow along before you go on. Now, where were we? The king had just informed 200 people that bread was a matter of statecraft. Osric came to me the next morning, and he did not pretend it was about the envoys. He shut the kitchen door, which no one ever did, and he stood with his back to it, like a man guarding a secret from the room it lived in. And he told me what the books had told him, and what 9 years of service had told him, and what he could no longer not say. The king had not chosen a cook 11 days ago. The king had been refusing every other table for the better part of a year. Osric had watched it happen so slowly he had mistaken it for habit. The dishes sent back untouched from the great kitchens, the feasts the king attended and did not eat, the way every road the man walked in his own fortress bent, eventually, toward one hearth. There had been an attempt, last spring, to pension off the kitchen staff and bring in a fashionable cook from the capital. The king had killed it in an afternoon and never explained. Osric had filed it under temper. He was no longer filing it under temper. The books call it the true bond, he said, very low, as though the word might wake something. The wolf knows the mate before the man does. It will choose for him. It will drag him to her 3 times a day if it must, and it will not stop, and it will not be reasoned with. And if the man marries elsewhere... He stopped. His tidy, worried face had gone grey. The books are not kind about what happens to a wolf forced to watch its mate given to another. Nor to the mate. I did not used to believe in the books, Tilda. I had stopped working. I do not remember deciding to. I was standing in the middle of my own kitchen with a dead spoon in my hand, and the whole last month rearranging itself behind my eyes, into a shape I had refused, out of plain self-protection, to let it make. Him on the too small stool. Him asking what was in the food. Him on the other side of the dough at midnight, asking did I believe in the bond, and going so still when I would not answer. A year of one man's feet, finding their way to the only person in the fortress who had never once wanted a thing from him. And the heel. Every time the heel. The burnt end, the discarded piece, the part of the loaf no one with a choice ever chooses. The most powerful man alive could have had the soft, white heart of any loaf in the kingdom. He took the piece that got left behind. He had been taking it, I understood now, with my whole face gone hot, the way you take a thing you are afraid to be caught wanting, the way you claim a thing no one else will, the way a man might choose, without one word, without the faintest idea he was doing it, the woman everyone else had overlooked. He does not know, I said. It came out hoarse. He is the last person in this fortress who knows, said Osric. Except, I had thought until this moment, you. I decided to leave. I want to be honest that my first plan, once I understood, was to run. Not from any fear of him, but from a clear-eyed reading of the arithmetic. A king does not marry his cook. A southern alliance does not dissolve because a wolf has opinions. If I stayed, I was the obstacle the whole court would need removed for the kingdom to have its peace, and I have spent my life being the thing that gets removed for other people's peace. I know that road. I have walked it before, in aprons, out of doors that did not bother to slam. So I went to tell him I was taking the post in the capital after all. It was the kind thing. It was the sensible thing. I had a whole speech, and it was good, and it was nearly true. He was on the stool, the absurd, too small stool, knees by his ears, in a kitchen gone gold with the late light, and he looked up when I came in with my speech behind my teeth, and before I could begin, he said the thing that undid all of it. I know now, he said, what it is, what I have been doing. He turned the burnt heel of that morning's loaf over in his huge hand, and looked at it as though it had been telling on him all along, which it had. I went and read Osric's wretched books. All of them. In one night. A breath. I owe you an apology, and I find I do not know its size. My wolf chose you a year ago and did not consult me, and I have spent that year dragging the both of us to your hearth like a fool chasing a smell, and you said nothing, and you let me have the stool, and you let me have... He lifted the heel an inch, helplessly. This. You let me have this, and you owe me nothing. I want that understood before I say anything else. You owe me nothing. The wolf is mine to answer for, not yours. My good, sensible speech died quietly behind my teeth, and I did not mourn it. There is a contract. I said instead.
There is. And a lady who will be Luna.
There is a lady, he said, who will not be Luna. He set the heel down on the table with great care, the way you set down a thing you have finally decided to stop pretending about. He stood off the ridiculous stool, and he crossed the kitchen, and he stopped, 1 pace away, near enough that I had to choose whether to look up, far enough that the choosing was mine. And he held out his hand, palm up, the strongest wolf alive, asking, in a kitchen, with flour on the table between us. I am asking badly, he said. I have no practice. Stay. Not as a post, not as a convenience for the envoys. Stay because I have walked the whole of my own house, and it only feels like a house in the one room you are in, and I would like to stop pretending that is about the bread. I looked at his open hand. I wanted to take it the way you want to sit down after a very long day.
Not yet, I said. There is a feast to get through first, and I have a suspicion the lady will not go quietly.
I was right about that. I am, it turns out, right about most things, except the ones that matter most, which I get to last. The betrothal feast was, as promised, the largest the hall had seen. I cooked it. There is a particular cruelty in being made to cook the feast that celebrates your own removal. And I did it anyway, and I did it perfectly. Because the food has never once been to blame for what people do over it, and I do not punish a goose for the sins of a court. I did not cook the small dish that came to the king's place between the fish and the meat. I had never seen it before. It came up from no station of mine, on no plate of mine, carried by no hand I knew. A delicate southern thing, pale and pretty, set before him with a flourish by one of Lady Vesna's own people. A gift, they said. From the lady to her intended, prepared the southern way.
I noticed it the way I notice everything in a kitchen, which is too late to matter and too early to forgive myself for.
The smell was wrong. There is a southern root, I knew it from a travelling cook years before, that smells of almonds and honey and does a very bad thing to the heart in any quantity worth tasting. I opened my mouth from the service door to say a word I had no standing to say. The king ate it before I could. It is very fast, that root. He was on his feet between one breath and the next, one hand on the table. And then the table was not enough, and the strongest wolf alive went down in front of his entire court at his own betrothal feast, grey and gasping, and the hall erupted, and Lady Vesna's clear voice cut through all of it, already aimed, already loaded, pointing at the only person in the room whose whole trade was putting things in food. The cook! The cook has poisoned the king! They had me by the arms before I had crossed half the floor. Of course they did. It is the obvious story, and obvious stories move faster than true ones. A discarded cook, a dismissed woman with a grudge and a hearth full of knives. I could see the court believing it, even as their king choked. Because it was easier than the truth. And people will always reach for the easy thing. It is the whole reason I had a king on a stool in the first place. I did the arithmetic. I had perhaps a minute before the root reached his heart, and rather less before the guards decided their grief needed somewhere to go. I have never been strong. I have spent my life being moved about by people larger than me. But I know exactly where a body is weakest, because I joint meat every day of my life. And I used an elbow and a heel and a great deal of unladylike intent, and I got one arm free, and I did the only thing that mattered, which was to start shouting what was in him.
Bitterroot. Southern bitterroot. It is in the dish. Smell it.
It is almonds. It is not mine. I keep no southern root in my kitchen. Send to her stores. A guard's hand closed on my throat, and I kept talking through it, because I am very stubborn, and the king was turning a colour men do not come back from. Charcoal and egg, and salt water, now, and bind his legs above the knee. He has minutes. You are wasting them holding a cook. Let her go. It was not a shout. It never is with him. It came from the floor, from a man who by every law of the body should not have been able to speak. And it went through the hall and stopped every hand in it. He had gotten up. I do not know how. The wolf had him by then, I think. Not a shift, nothing so clean, just the animal underneath, holding the man upright by main force, because the man it had chosen was being held by the throat, and the wolf had a great deal to say about that. He stood swaying, grey as ash, and he did not reach for his court, and he did not reach for the lady in her wedding silver. He reached for me. One hand across the wreck of his own feast, open, the way it had been open across the dough and the table 12 times, and the whole court watched the dying king of the Iron Territories choose, with the last of himself, the cook they were about to hang. The hand at my throat let go. I will not pretend the next while was dignified. Saving a life rarely is. They brought the charcoal and the eggs, because a man does not disobey that voice, even half dead, and I put my hands into the ugly, necessary work a body needs done when a southern root is trying to stop its heart. And I did it on the floor of the great hall in my feast apron, with 200 nobles watching, and the man's head in my lap. Here is the cost, since the songs always skip it. The bond does not wait for a convenient moment. It came up through me while my hands were busy keeping him alive. Not warmth. I have warned you about the songs. A great, cold weight settling in behind my ribs as the thing my grandmother believed in stopped being a story and became a fact with its hooks in me. The sudden, unbearable knowledge of exactly how much I had to lose, arriving in the very instant I was most likely to lose it. My hands shook. I did not let them stop. I have cooked through grief, and I have cooked through fear, and I found I could keep a man alive through the worst news my own body had ever handed me, which was that I loved him, and had for some time, and had been the last to know, the way I am always the last to know the things that matter most. He breathed. It caught and tore, and then it came, ragged and furious and alive, and the grey went out of him by degrees, and somewhere in there his hand found my wrist and held it. Not to be saved. He was past the worst by then. Just to hold it. Just because it was mine. Lady Vesna had begun, quietly, to leave. She did not get far. Osric, tidy, worried, 9 years loyal Osric, who had spent the feast watching everyone because someone had to, had already sent men to her stores, and they came back through the emptying hall with a small stoppered jar of pale southern root, and they did not have to say a word. A kitchen with no southern dishes does not stock a southern poison. The lady who had brought her own cooks had brought her own evidence. The hall, which an hour before had been ready to hang me on the strength of an obvious story, turned on her with the speed of people who very much need to have been on the right side all along. She looked at me, at the last, the way the careful always look at the lucky. I was not lucky. I was right, and I was loved, and I had a better nose for poison than her cook. But I let her think it was luck. It costs me nothing, and it spares me the bother of explaining. He was a weak recovering and an unbearable patient, and I know because I cooked every spoonful that went into him and stood over him while he ate it, which he did not protest, having lost the war about where his meals came from quite thoroughly and in public. The claim, when it came, was not a grand thing. It did not need to be. The whole court had watched a dying king choose his cook with the last of himself, and there is no announcement that improves on that. But he made it anyway, on his feet again, in the same hall, before the same nobles, because he said, and I have come to understand this is the truest thing about him, that a thing done where everyone can see it cannot be quietly undone later. He gave no speech. He had learned, I think, that speeches were not his weapon. He simply came to where I stood by the service door, because the cook always stands by the service door, and he took my hand in front of all of them, and he led me away from the door and to the high table, and he sat me in the chair beside his own, the Luna's chair, that had stood empty his whole reign. And then, because he is who he is, he tore the heel off the loaf on the table and put it in my hand and closed my fingers around it. And the court that had once needed an explanation for everything he did needed none at all for this. When he kissed me, it was not the thing the songs are about. It was quieter, and it undid me far more. It was the feeling of being chosen out loud, after a lifetime of being released with thanks. The door that for once did not close behind me. The warmth that for once was not a place I was only passing through. That is all I will tell you. The rest is mine, and I have earned the keeping of it. Lady Vesna was sent south, with the contract dissolved and her name intact, which was more mercy than she had arranged for me. And the alliance survived anyway, because alliances are tougher than the people who broker them, and her father, a practical man, decided a living trade route was worth more than a dead daughter's pride. There were whispers, of course. A cook in the Luna's chair set every careful tongue in 3 territories wagging. There always is a cost when the structure bends. I let them whisper. Whispers have never once spoiled a sauce. A year on, I am the Luna of the Iron Territories, which has changed less about my days than you might think, because I refused, flatly and from the first morning, to stop being the cook. A kingdom can find another Luna. It cannot easily find another person willing to get the bread right. So we compromised. I run the kitchen and I sit in the chair, and the court has decided this is eccentric rather than scandalous, which is the second best thing a court can decide about a woman, and the best you can hope for when you have flour under your nails at a state dinner. They built him a proper chair for the kitchen, a great carved thing sized for a king, with arms and a back and dignity. He has never once sat in it. He sits on the stool, knees by his ears, in a kitchen gone gold with the late light, watching me work with the grave attention other men give to war. And when the loaf comes out, he takes the heel before I can stop him. The burnt end, the discarded piece, the part no one with a choice ever chooses. Except that he has every choice in the world now, and he chooses it still, every single day. And I have stopped pretending I do not know what it means. It means the same thing it always meant. His wolf knew it a year before he did, and I knew it last of all. And the strongest creature alive worked the matter out by dragging a king to a kitchen 3 times a day until somebody finally fed him the right thing. So tell me, you, wherever you are, whatever the hour where you are listening tonight, did you see it before he did? Most people do. He set a low bar. Stay, and tell me below where you are listening from, and what your own wolf would drag you to 3 times a day, if you ever let it. Follow along for her side of these stories, and I will keep the fire lit and a heel of the loaf set back for whoever needs it. Mind the stool, though. It is taken.